Hey folks, Colin here from Sumthins Recording, and today I want to show you how to deal with that woody quality or that woody sort of sound that you get when mixing hollow body bass guitar. We're going to be looking at mixing a hollow body bass guitar today, but before we dive in, if you are ready to go a little bit deeper into the mixing process in its entirety and really start to hone your workflow as a mixing engineer, then I have just the thing for you. It is my 7-step mixing checklist, and it's just a simple PDF that will walk you through the entire mixing process, step by step, to help you get professional and radio-ready mixes without any more of the hassle and without any more of the guesswork. It is a completely free guide, and you can download it below using the link in the video description. Now let's jump in here and look at this bass guitar. So this is kind of a unique situation that we get here at this studio. We've got a couple bass guitars over on the wall for tracking, and one of them's a violin style or hollow body bass guitar. So it has a pretty unique sound to it, and it can be a little bit of a challenge to deal with inside the mix. So I'm going to play you what this song sounds like here, and then I'm going to solo up the bass guitar so you can hear our finished bass guitar, and you'll hear how it's a little bit different of an animal to deal with inside of a mix here. So here's our finished mix.
Running and running, I've been chasing her around, but I can't pin this little dragon down. She gives me half of a sign, she wants me in her life, but I can't help thinking that I'm wasting her time. I'll never be the man she needs, so I'll say my calls and be a memory.
So a hollow body or a violin bass like this will always kind of get you that Beatles, that Paul McCartney sort of sound from the 60s. On all the Beatles records there, when he's using that violin bass, you're always going to get that kind of low mid energy and that really mid-rangey sort of sound, especially if they're using a pick on a hollow body bass like this. You get a lot of buildup in the low mid area, and you get that kind of, to me, it sounds like it's that woody sound on a bass guitar, and it doesn't sit well in the mix, and when you try and cut it out, it can be quite difficult to get your low end to balance as you trim out this low mid area. So let me show you how we dealt with this inside the mix here. We're going to go through piece by piece here on the processing. The first thing I have on the bus here it's a bass amp and a bass DI. The first thing I have on the bus here is a limiter. And you can see the ceilings all the way down. We're just pushing a little bit more into it, about a dB into it, to get a little bit of reduction. You can see it's quite dynamic here, and you'll get that with a bass guitar if they're using a pick, especially something like this, a hollow body bass guitar. It's going to have a lot of mid-range, so when you get that pick attack going, it can be very, very dynamic. So I'm going to use a couple limiters here to help dial it in a little bit and get it consistent before we start trimming it out a little bit. So here's without the limiter, and then I'll kick it in. You can see what we're doing with it. So you can see we're doing about 2.5 dB reduction there. Fastest release, normal style attack. So the medium style attack here on the limiter, still pretty fast because it is a limiter. That 2.5 dB reduction helps to pull down some of those peaks a little bit, smooth them out a little bit. So as we roll into our EQ, we're not dealing with so much of the mid-range on the bass moving up and down. We got a little bit more control here. You can hear how low midly it sounds, and it has that really hollow sort of sound to it. So moving down here to our EQ, doing quite a bit of work before we even start compressing, before we even start getting some low end in on this bass guitar. Let me pull all these moves out here, and we'll get them in one by one here on our bass guitar. So we got no low end boost here, so we're not going to put that back in. But we've got these 4 other moves here in addition to our high pass filter. The high pass filter is the first thing I'm putting in to control our low end here. Got a lot of action going on in the low mid and our mid range. I want to control everything first before I start trying to enhance everything. So listen without this high pass in, and then I'm going to kick it in. Listen to how it tightens up our low end a little bit. We might lose a little bit of low end power. That's okay. We want to control our low end before we boost here. So you can hear how it's focusing our low end a little bit, trying to get it focused here on the fundamental. But if you're watching here, and even with your ears, you can hear we have a lot of buildup here around the 200 hertz area. We need to get some of that kind of, that hollow, that woody sort of sound out of this bass guitar. And that's our next big move here. Doing about a 7.5 dB cut at 180 hertz here. I've narrowed up the Q a little bit, but I don't want to narrow it too much because I need to get all of this out of here. But I'm narrowing it a little bit because we are quite close to the fundamental on here on the bass guitar. That's the challenge with mixing hollow body like this. Sometimes trying to get that build up there in the low mid out, you end up cutting too much of the low end. That's why we're doing it first before we compress and before we boost here. So take a listen without, and then I'm going to kick this cut in. You can hear how we totally scoop out all that hollowness. Hear how much cleaner our bass sounds now? It sounds like a huge portion of the bass was just opened up, like we're pulling a blanket off the bass cab there and just opening up the sound a little bit just by pulling out all of that woodiness and that hollow sort of sound here in the low mid area. Moving up a little bit in the mid range here, we're doing about a 4 dB cut at about 500 hertz, 495 hertz. Here's where some of that mid-range getting a little bit nasty. It's a little bit nasally there, and some of those notes pop out in a weird way. So just pulling that back a little bit. It's just one of the things you're going to get with mixing a hollow body like this. Some of the frequencies ring in a weird way, and they'll come out of the body in a weird way. Just a stranger sort of sound here. I'm going to kick this in. Listen to how our mid-range cleans up. So we've cleaned up our low mid. We're going to clean up our mid-range a little bit here. So with this cut here, it doesn't feel so much like we're pulling out some mid-range. It feels like we're adding a little bit of fullness on the bottom end. That's because we're removing some of the frequency that's covering up other frequency ranges. By pulling out the low mids and the mid-range here, we open up the frequency spectrum for the low end and the top end to shine through. Now, I'm going to add a little bit here in the mid-range here, kind of etching up into the high mids here. A little bit at about 722 hertz. This is kind of that nicer area that's going to give you some bite on your bass guitar, that nice mid-range bite that you want. And as you can see, we're pretty close again to the same area we just cut. It's just one of the battles with mixing hollow body. Everything's like right there in the mid-range together. So you're cutting something, you're losing something else. It's just a balancing act here. So a little bit of the 722 hertz, about 3 dB, and it's going to give us a little bit of that mid-range bite back, but a little bit nicer. It's not going to give us some of those weird ringing frequencies here. So we'll start without it, and then I'll kick it in here. And I'll also kick in this higher boost here. It's about a 4 dB boost at 4K. That's going to give us some of that string and that pick noise to help our bass cut through the mix here. So a little bit of that mid-range back to give it some bite there, and then some of that top in there to get some of that string noise, some of that pick noise to help our bass cut through the mix and feel present. Now that we've got a little bit of control on it, we've added a couple of the frequencies that we want. We're going to get some compression going here to help even out our bass and hold it down a little bit better. So I love using this 1176 style compressor on bass we're at about 0.52 milliseconds on the attack, so a little bit slower than the medium attack on this unit, and then fastest release here. You can see how much compression we're doing on a hit play here. Listen without, and then I'll kick it in here. You can hear we get a little bit more control. We'll probably get some of that low mid area back. That's okay. We can take care of that in our next plugin here with our EQ. We get a lot of body from this compressor. It's one of the reasons I love using it on bass guitar, but we get some of that hollowness and some of that woodiness back that we cut out. That's why we cut so much out, because we're getting some of it back here with the compressor, but it's evening out our bass in a nice way that helps it feel full. We're doing about 5 dB of compression here with this unit. Some of these bigger notes ring up towards 7 dB. That's okay. Any further than that, and it starts to feel a little bit too aggressive, a little bit too transient there. So we're airing a little bit lower. You can see we've got this limiter later to take care of it. Now moving on here is where we're going to pull up some of that low end. So a little bit more control here, and then boosting some low end. And pulling out a little bit more of that low mid area, that hollowness, that woody sort of sound, making sure we have a little bit of control in the sub area, and then we're boosting up some of the fundamental here at around 80 hertz. I'm going to A-B all of these together because they all work together to sit our low end where we want it. A little boost at 80 hertz, a little cut at 170, and then rolling our high-pass filter up to about 30 hertz here. All works together to sit our low end right where we want it in the mix here. Take a listen. They're little boosts and little cuts, but it's just that perfect shift in the frequency range to highlight the fundamental and dip down that kind of hollow, that woody sort of sound coming from the low mid on the bass guitar. So that's that there. In our last plug-in here, just a little bit more control on these peaks on the bass guitar to even it out and help it sit ultra consistently inside the mix here. Hollow body instruments, hollow body basses especially, can be very, very dynamic instruments, and we want to get a nice amount of control on it because it is our low end, it is our foundation inside the mix here. So take a listen without it, and then I'll kick this in. You can see how much reduction we're doing to finalize our bass sound here. So just about 2.5 dB reduction here with this final limiter. You can see when I'm boosting into it, just pulling the ceiling all the way down until our bass is hitting it there a little bit. That 2.5 dB reduction is really, really nice for a couple of reasons. With this limiter like this, with a brick wall limiter like this, our bass pushing into it, we get a little bit of distortion, which is nice to help our bass cut through the mix, and it helps it feel less like that kind of hollow, woody, hollow body bass sort of sound. We still have that quality that makes it unique. We get a little bit of that crunch on the top from pushing into the limiter, and it evens out our bass overall. So take a listen. Everything together here now without all the plugins, and then with all the plugins. You can hear our before and after here on the bass guitar. So we're going after that woody, that hollow sound that you're getting from that hollow body or violin style bass guitar. All we're doing, a little bit of limiting on the front end to reduce some of the dynamic range that we get from this instrument. Then doing our control here, so getting rid of all that hollow sound, that little bit of weird mid-range we get, and pulling up some top end there to get some bite and some air on those strings, the string noise, the pick noise, cutting some of that low in there, some of the sub area, so we're controlling our low end. Then bringing on our compressor to control our volume. We get a little bit of fullness back from it. And then our final EQ here, this is where we set our low end exactly where we want it. A little cut, a little boost, helps shift the frequency range towards the fundamental, and then our final limiter here, just another 2.5 dB of limiting to sit our bass exactly where we want it inside the mix here. I hope that was helpful for you. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, if you are ready to take your mixes to the next level and really start dialing in your workflow as an engineer, then I have just the tool for you, and it is completely free. It is my 7-step mixing checklist, and you can download it below to start creating more professional mixes in less time. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.